And welcome. This is Dr. Greg Cason. You're on Off the Couch with Dr. Greg, where psychology meets everyday life. As you heard, I am a doctor, but I'm a psychologist. So we're going to be talking about psychological research, and I'm here with producer Brian Gomez.
Happy Monday, you guys.
Hey, Brian. And also on the board, it's Gus. Hi, Gus.
Yay. Hello again.
It's good to have you here. So today on Off the Couch, we're going to do some cool stuff. The hidden reason why Barbie didn't win any Oscars. And don't give me BS about that she won that best song thing. I don't know if that counts in my book. But the real reason that movie didn't win any Oscars, it'll astound you. There is psychological research backing this one up. Also, does teaching racism make white kids feel bad? Why people blame the victim in crimes, and we're going to talk about a man who gets 217 COVID-19 vaccinations, and we ask the question, why? And if you like, by the way, what you're hearing today, I want to remind you, I almost never do this, Brian, to like, subscribe, and give us 5 stars. That'll help us. It'll help the show. It'll help us in the algorithms, however they work. And if you want a copy of the studies, go to the YouTube page at www.youtube.com/Dr. Greg. But first, I was hit by a piece of news the other day, and it hit me so hard I just went completely quiet about it. I lost a former employer of mine, a mentor and friend, a man named David Mixner. David Mixner, if you're in the know, you'll know who he is. If you're not in the know, I invite you to look at the New York Times obituary a column, because it really goes over his history, but even that doesn't do a great job because there's so much to this man. He was a political consultant. That's how I worked with him. He's also a social justice warrior and a fierce gay rights advocate. He died of complications of long-term COVID, and he was 77 years old. Now, just to let you know, I worked for David right out of college, and when I got out of college, there was a big recession. We couldn't find jobs, and a friend of mine who was a psychology grad student at UCLA was working for David and said, hey, look, I have to leave because when you're in psychology, you have to go and do your thing somewhere else sometimes. And he said, look, I have to leave this job. Do you want to talk to him? I think you'd be a good match. Well, I went, I became this man's personal assistant, and I had never had experience in working in politics, but I had a fierce interest in it. And if you really look, psychology, politics, and business, those are my sort of areas of interest. They're all psychology. And so I really had an interest in this, and this man wasn't just a random political consultant. He was at the hub of so many things. He worked with Martin Luther King. He was part of a pro-peace movement. He did a lot of different things that were really quite profound. And we worked on congressional campaigns and presidential campaigns. We worked on the first Joe Biden campaign. I met Joe Biden in this man's living room, just the two of us, David, myself, and Joe Biden. And it was incredible to meet these kinds of people. Joe Biden was a senator then. And then when he dropped out of the race, then we went to Bill Clinton's campaign, and Bill Clinton, also incredible, and talked to Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, and I would have to say all of these big professional people, senators, congressmen, and people from both sides of the aisle. He was a Democratic political consultant, but people from both sides of the aisle consulted him because he had such a fiercely accurate political mind. And just to give you an idea, he was a populist before populism. He was all about helping the common man. He supported unions. He got mad at me when I bought a Japanese car because he said only buy American. He was someone who really wanted to help our country move forward and cared very much about every single person in the United States. And we have much to thank for this man, and he did it all behind the scenes. So he was really great, and he's probably one of the major reasons, Brian, just to let you know that I am in psychology today, not because he told me to go into psychology, but because he believed in me enough that he's, I even got an application to work at the White House and, all kinds of things. He really believed in me. And I thought, if someone believes in me, then maybe I can do more. And that's what really started me on the road toward becoming a psychologist. I really didn't think I was capable of going beyond undergrad at that point. So he was really quite
beautiful. That's really touching, and thank you for sharing that with us too, honestly.
I think he had that effect on hundreds, if not thousands, of people. But now to the good stuff, the psychological research, the hidden reason Barbie didn't win any Oscars except for the one that doesn't count. I mean, not that I don't like Billie Eilish, but best song, but it sort of stands on its own. I mean, it was good, but you don't have to see the movie to appreciate the song, whereas every other Oscar, you seem to have to see the movie to appreciate it. So Barbie remember that Barbenheimer weekend where Barbie and Oppenheimer came out the same weekend? This was really quite a big deal, and Barbie really actually won the box office and has continued to win the box office worldwide. Barbie is now the 14th movie for lifetime box office in the world. Like it is an incredible achievement. By the way, Oppenheimer is not too shabby at number 61, so it's not so bad. So they're both big box office movies. But Oppenheimer, as everyone knows, is the one that won Best Picture for Oscar, and there might be some interesting reasons for that, at least according to a University of Maryland and London School of Business study that's published in the Strategic Management Journal. Can you guess what those reasons are? Can you guess, Gus, what that reason is? A lot of pink?
No, I don't know.
Do you have a guess, Brian?
No, I'm kind of curious to see what the studies showed, because everybody has their own opinion of why it didn't.
Well, I think research once again gives us the answer. It's because it starred a woman, and it seems like female-led movies are continually maligned, and we can talk about that. In most cases, female-led movies have lower ratings, they get worse reviews, and they make less money than other films. Now, Barbie made great money, but that's sort of an unusual thing, but they typically don't win the review contest. So for this study, researchers did something kind of great. They looked at something called the Internet Movie Database. That's IMDb. You can go to imdb.com and you can see everything you want to know about movies. You can see casts. You can read about the actors. It's really that one-stop shop internal industry place. And researchers analyzed 400 million consumer ratings of IMDb, their database. They did 400 million consumer ratings of 4,000 films, and they went from 1992 to 2018. So they really looked at a lot of data. And they found that men and women alike rated male-led movies basically the same. So people, when they looked at male-led movies like Oppenheimer, where there's a male lead, an identifiable male lead, that those basically, women and men see them about the same. But when it came to female-led film, male audiences, not female audiences, but male audiences in particular, were more likely to give that movie a worse score, pulling down the mean. And they basically give a worse review to the movie.
That makes sense in a weird way. I saw it in the military whenever we were in boot camp, for example, and they would put a female in charge. The men hated it. You could see the anger of just having a female in charge, or leading. You could see that it really did stir some stuff up inside them, Yeah,
it does challenge authority in a lot of people. And, but this is interesting. This does nothing to challenge authority. But when we're watching a movie, we identify with the main character. If not identify with them, we're at least following their story. So we're often very interested in them. in the IMDb database, a lot of reviewers gave female-led films a 1 out of 10, with 10 being the very best it could be, and that pulled down the average. So Oppenheimer reviewers had more of a normal spread. They didn't have as many 1s. I mean, there might be people who didn't groove to the movie. They might give it a 3 or an 8, a 7. You know, they didn't think it was the best thing in the world, but they thought it had some merit, where a lot of the Barbie reviews had 1s, like it was an absolute bomb to them. IMDb ratings, by the way, for Barbie is 6.9 out of 10, and Oppenheimer's 8.4 out of 10. But it's easier to see how many people actually like the movie, because 75% of people who saw Barbie liked the movie, but 83% of Oppenheimer viewers liked the movie. So a higher number of people actually liked Oppenheimer than liked Barbie, or a percentage of people, of viewers that saw it. Did you like Barbie?
I did. I thought it was cute. The message was cool. Like, I saw a lot of stuff online that people were so upset by it that I'm like, well, if the shoe fits.
Were they upset? What was they upset about?
I feel like, having the whole woman movement and having that spotlight on them and having the guys painted, not so great in that way. But I mean, it's real life.
What did you think, Gus? Did you like it?
I did the Barbenheimer double feature.
Oh, you were there that weekend.
Same day.
Oh, wow. That is commitment to do both. Yeah, wow. Good for you. I actually really liked the movie. I thought it was kind of neat. The part I didn't like in the movie, oddly enough, was the Will Ferrell executive stuff. But I understand he had to play like a total buffoon, and that was part of the point. But in a way, I don't know, found a little distracting. I actually loved the whole Barbie world and the struggles they were having and the difficulties and sort of dealing with being a two-dimensional character. And I thought actually they did a great job. Did you know, I was watching a thing on this because I like to do a deep dive when I talk about a story, and I thought Greta Gerwig, I thought the whole movie was her idea and she wrote it, etc. And then I see, who was the woman who starred in it? Now I'm forgetting. Do you remember, Gus? Margot Robbie. Thank you, because I'm, that's who I do forget his stars' names sometimes. Apologies, but but she was saying, we were looking for a writer, and we thought that Greta Gerwig would be a great voice for the film, and I think they were really correct.
Yeah, I mean, together they killed it, and she looked like the perfect Barbie doll. Honestly,
she did. She went from playing Tanya, what's her name? The one who, bludgeoned. Yeah, I mean, she was Tanya Harding, yeah, and she really did a great job in that. She's just great in everything she does, so she's quite an amazing force. But it wasn't just the quality of these movies. Now, you could say, okay, Greg, it's just the quality of the movies where females are the lead. But so the researchers wanted to test that notion as well. So they used ChatGPT to generate 20 plausible movie plots. And then they randomly selected male and female leads. So they just said, here are 20 plausible movie plots here. And then they kind of put in males versus females to see how people rated them. They surveyed 800 people on how much they'd like the fake films. So they were judging how much they'd like it and how eager they were to watch the fake film. Now, respondents were less likely to want to view a female-led film. But when it starred a male, they were more likely to want to watch it.
I'd be curious to see if they could do with gay men voting and then straight men voting on that, because I feel like as gay guys we kind of do the female lead.
I have to say that's a great point, and that's a limit to this research. And sexual orientation, you can't just give gender. It's good to give sexual orientation, and it's good to talk about things. But sometimes if they do just everybody we surveyed and they do one big finding, sometimes that's a really interesting thing. But sometimes it is interesting to divide things up into groups to sort of see what the impact is. I do agree with you, and maybe gay men are identifying more with straight women, because there is a bright spot, which is straight women, or women. I'm not saying straight women. Maybe I'd take the straight out of it. Just women give top ratings to female-led films and independent studios. And I am a sucker for an independent film. I do like that. I do like a unusual film from some random country. As long as I can read the captions, I'm good. And other films without mass appeal. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So that does help the box office on those films. So we need our female audiences and our gay male audiences as well. Okay. So new study. Does teaching about racism make white kids feel bad? What do you think?
I mean, it's not a good feeling, but it's what needs to be, talked about. And yeah.
Did you learn about racism when you were in school?
No.
Oh, did you learn about the Civil War?
I feel like we went over it, yeah. But
you did. Did you learned about slavery and the impacts of slavery? Okay.
But I don't think they really break it down in like a deeper way than just the facts of what was happening.
Just the facts, ma'am. Just for I know
or
this.
What the facts were written, in the book. Sorry.
Say where you went to school. Where you went to elementary, high school.
So that was my whole mix-up, because I went to elementary school in San Diego, and then middle school, 8th grade, and like high school was in Texas. So
he's keeping it conservative.
Yeah.
Right on.
Well, it was a big culture shock too. Like that was a big culture shock, because I grew up pretty white in San Diego, and then Texas was maybe a handful of white kids at my school when I moved there. So it was, yeah. I learned a lot.
How about you, Gus? Did you learn about racism in school?
Yeah, I did. I would say it's still not taught enough, though, because even with that making people feel guilty, there's still so much stuff they skip over as well. Like, they don't talk about Tulsa at all. And Tulsa's a big thing.
Yeah. No, Tulsa, I think, is missing from our entire curriculum. And I think that's only really come to light in the last few years about how important that is. These are, I'm not going to do it justice by even saying, but it's something to look up. But this is a whole financial district that was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that a big part of the town, who were all white, decided to raid, and they burned down these businesses, killed people, lynched people. I mean, it devastated the community and in an almost unbelievable way. And yes, that was completely missing from the curriculum when I went to school. Now, I went to school before you guys. But what's interesting, and I'm always remarking on this, I went to school in a really conservative place, Huntington Beach, and it's just, they're continually struggling with how conservative they are. Probably one of the most conservative cities in Orange County. And Orange County, California, is already quite well known for being conservative. So although Katie Porter right now is our congressperson, so it's a little bit of a nuance, but I don't think it's Huntington Beach that gave that win to her as much as maybe some of the surrounding towns. But still, there are a lot of fans of hers in that city. That's a congressperson who is more progressive, as you may know. But what's interesting about the town that I grew up in is when I was in 5th grade, we learned about the Civil War. Like, it was a huge thing we did, and it was like a semester, and we spent all this time on the states and the struggles, and I really appreciate that we got that exploration that early, and really with the point of understanding about how these people suffered for something that was so like outside of our human experience, which is not just racism, but slavery. And so it's just really a kind of a crazy thing. But I don't remember ever feeling bad. And I went to a school that was, I just didn't feel bad about it. I felt horrified that it happened, but I didn't feel personally responsible, certainly not as a 5th grader. But I think we're hearing this a lot from certain school boards. You hear about it in school board meetings. You hear about it from certain politicians, like in Texas. There you go, Brian. And in Florida and maybe some other places, you're hearing about how bad it is to teach about racism. So North Carolina State University paired up with Duke University and Dickinson College, and they published an article in Era Open, which is the journal of the American Education Research Association, to explore the question of the effect of these kinds of teachings on the kids. And so we always hear this, and we hear this around critical race theory. Do you guys ever hear about that?
Yeah, of
You
course,
do?
in the news.
That's so interesting.
Big in Florida, for sure.
Yeah, because critical race theory isn't taught before law school. So, I mean, if you're going to enroll in law school, then yeah, if you don't like critical race theory, then by all means, go to a law school board meeting. I don't know what that is, but it doesn't make sense that people think it's happening, and so it seemed all very odd. So there was a belief that just teaching about race, which is just a normal part of life, there's a belief that this will stress students and increase alienation, especially among the white kids. So North Carolina State, Duke, and Dickinson, they got together with a public high school and they said, look, we want to do an intervention and measure its impact. So there was a very controlled experiment, but this is what we call quasi-experimental because it's in the wild. It's when you're working with a group who's already formed, who's just part of their normal thing, and you're kind of coming in and assessing something, and they're putting an intervention within this education system in this high school. And they wanted to do a classroom intervention aimed at helping students understand and discuss issues related to racism. The study was an intervention that's 45 minutes long, once per week for 10 weeks. I was thinking, where would this go in school curriculum? Probably in health class or maybe government or some, I don't know. But the study, they just kind of dropped it in once a week for 10 weeks, and they assessed 227 students before the intervention and 3 months after the intervention. And they measured some things. They measured how engaged the students were. Like, did they like this kind of curriculum? Did they participate? How related they were? How related they felt with the staff? So did they like these people? The extent to which students felt like they belonged in the school community, which is one of the big things. We hear that people feel alienated. So did these students feel like they belonged? Did they get stressed out by it? Like, do people take this on personally? And they also wanted to measure the extent of what they were teaching, which is how the students perceived social inequity or inequality. They also did a smaller group to study more closely, and this is another way. Sometimes we subdivide out within research a smaller group that we really want to explore a little more deeply. They did 67% of the students also participated doing daily surveys for 3 weeks during the intervention, and the daily surveys were to assess their stress levels and feelings of belonging to see if those went up and down over the weeks, and they were daily fluctuations to see how they were feeling. So, I mean, I was kind of impressed that they really kind of, they went in there and they were just laser focused on what's going to be. So what are the key findings? Well, I bet you guys have been waiting for that. Key findings: 60% of study participants report being highly engaged with the intervention, and 20% were passively or somewhat engaged. I'd have to say this is a popular school course if you have that many people who are engaged. I was thinking, would that be for geometry? Would we have 60%? Would we have 10% of the class highly engaged? I doubt it. Anyway, the highly engaged group also demonstrated significant growth in their awareness of social inequality. So they really learned something when they were engaged. But the big findings for our purposes, why I thought this was such an interesting study, were those 67% of people they recorded daily. They found 0, no increase in stress, 0, no decrease in feelings of belonging. This was true for all 67 participants. There wasn't one who felt worse about being taught about racism, and that included the white ones. So How about that, you guys? You thought it was going a different direction, huh?
The science is proving
This
that it doesn't matter. And my big thing is on that is like, if your feelings are hurt because we're talking about racism, imagine the people that are facing the racism.
Yeah, no, it's a real thing. And I think it's also really valuable to learn about this. Let's say, as a white guy, I think I can comment on this. It's very valuable for me to understand the impacts of words and deeds and acts on other people. And because people talk about white privilege, and I sometimes bristle at that, like, what the hell are they talking about, et cetera, et cetera. But that's kind of the point, because the fact that I don't perceive it is probably the problem. And so understanding where the problem exists and how that happens helps me to be a better person, helps me to treat others in a better way.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with accepting that there is a problem and acknowledging it. I feel like there's a problem when you try to fight that there is a problem, where it's like, nobody's getting hurt if you're accepting it. Nobody's dying if you're just being like, yeah, there is an issue here that we need to talk about.
No, and some things need to be handled more delicately. We do need to listen to people, etc. But I think ultimately, and this is something I've believed for a long time, is it's really hard to do permanent damage on someone's feelings if you're not like a family member or someone they love, etc. And teachers can do a number too, so people that are close friends. Now I'm expanding the circle out, but what I do want to say is sometimes it's good to be a little bit uncomfortable, to learn new things, to hear about other people, because that just pushes you to grow. And I liken the mind to a muscle that you need to stress it in order to grow it.
That's true. I mean, if you don't learn or anything, how are you growing?
I don't know. So now it's my favorite study of all, because this is blaming the victim. And this is what I've always been kind of simultaneously horrified and fascinated that people blame victims of crime. And I see this happen all the time. It's easy for people to look the other way when someone else needs help. Now, we hear this. We probably see it with GoFundMe campaigns. I would never go to the GoFundMe page just to have a look. But when I do get them from people, probably my first reaction is like, oh my God. To be honest, but then generally I've only received them from people who were truly in need. So that was helpful. But, I have to monitor my own feelings. Also, our own feelings about homeless encampments. You hear this all the time. We hear it in LA. People like looking around the homeless encampments going, why can't the police just clean them up? It's not that easy, but it's a little bit like, these are human beings in those encampments, or even the water supply in impoverished communities. I remember in Flint, Michigan, when they were just continually having problems, and people are like, well, why don't they just move? Like it was their fault for having a terrible water supply. So we have a tendency to blame the victim. So worst cases too, and this is where I've probably heard it the most, is someone being robbed at gunpoint, or their house being robbed, or the worst of all, a woman being sexually assaulted. We often go to blame the victim. We ask things like, what was she wearing? Where was she? Like, what time of day was it? Why didn't she call out? Why didn't she scream? Did she have a rape whistle? Why not? Did she not carry mace? People ask these questions, and we're going to talk about why. Because in the journal Evolution and Human Behavior, they did a study. Evolution and Human Behavior published a study done by Washington University in St. Louis. Washington University in St. Louis is not the same as University of Washington. Just to be clear, it's a university in Missouri. I think that it happens a lot. Those two schools get mixed up. It's an excellent university, though. So they both are. So they presented test subjects with a variety of fictitious news stories, and they told them the stories were real. So a little bit of a lie, but this happens a lot in research. They kind of mislead a little bit, and then they'll tell them the truth at the end. So they gave them these fictitious stories. They told them they were real. These were cases of misfortune, like a car accident while texting and driving, someone getting shot by an unsecured gun, or someone getting attacked by a bear while hiking. Ooh, scary.
I don't know how that's somebody's fault.
Well, I mean, I saw a guy when I was at Yosemite once, and there was a bear, and the guy was trying to get up close to it to take a picture, and he kept going, and he kept like talking to the bear, and he kept getting closer, and I said, dude, the bear's going to attack you. And he's like, no, it's cute. And I'm like, you got to be kidding. But luckily, the bear just ran away. Okay. But it may not have. I mean, bears,
you never know.
You can't predict. It's not like they wear a warning sign. Okay, these scenarios were designed to test a person's empathy and their willingness to help. So after reading each story, they rated the character of the victim and the level of blame the victim had for the mishap. So they went through and they rated the character and the blame. And they even decided, they're like, we got to test like something real. So they paid people 60 cents for each scenario they reviewed. But they said, look, because these are real stories, if you'd like to give all or part of your 60 cents to that particular victim, we can do that. Just indicate that. So and they even said, if you want to donate a little more, we can do that as well. So they were trying to make it easy for people to weigh in and to, see what the real world impacts. What are the results? Well, I mean, I don't think it's going to be a surprise. There's a general lack of generosity. They only averaged 15 cents to each victim. That means a lot of people held back on the money. I mean, 60 cents. But people were like, I'll give 30.
Oh my God.
Or maybe they gave their whole 60 cents, but a lot of people said, no, I'm not going to keep that 60 cents. But 60 cents used to buy a burrito at one time. I doubt it even comes close now. But there was less than a third. That's less than a third. That was much less than was possible to give. So closer look. They did multiple experiments, and the multiple experiments revealed the more character flaws somebody had, they saw in a victim. So the more character flaws they perceived, the less willing they were to donate. They basically were saying the victim doesn't deserve help.
It's kind of mean.
It is pretty.
But I understand.
So they were also looking at this belief. There's a belief in the world. Do you have this belief that the world is fair and just? Do you have that belief? Oh, you don't? Brian?
I know it's not.
You don't either, Gus. I can see Gus is shaking his head. Yeah, I'm not a fair and just person either. In fact, I perceive injustice a lot. Maybe it's a little bit about what I do, that I have a lens for that, but at the same time, I think it's not too hard to see in a town like Los Angeles. Anyway, that people develop a belief that only bad things happen to bad people. But the research showed that, in fact, this is not really true. Most people believe that the world is deeply unfair. So it looks like all of us are in very good company. So instead of making a blanket assumption, these people, they weren't making a blanket assumption saying, well, if something bad happens, something bad, they must have done something bad. It's karma. You hear those karma people? I also don't believe in that, because I see bad people all the time get away with murder, and good people have bad things happen to them. What do we say there? So I think karma is just a way to comfort us sometimes. So instead of making a blanket assumption that all victims are somehow deserve misfortune, people go out of their way to find fault in each victim on a case-by-case basis. So they're actually going out of their way to find fault so that they can go, oh, yeah, okay, I see why this happened to that person. They were doing this. It was at this time of day. They didn't lock their door. They blah, blah, blah. I mean, look at this. If you're driving down a street and you're at an intersection and it's a beautiful day and you're playing your music and you have your window down and you're in the traffic lane waiting at a stoplight and some guy comes up with a gun and says, get out of your car, and you're carjacked, is it your fault that you are driving down that street or that your window was rolled down or you were distracted by music?
Remember there was that robbery that happened by my job?
Yes.
Where the guy was getting
yes,
jumped.
Brian, talk about that. We can't leave people hanging. What was the robbery?
So there's a owner of this gym on Sunset in Sweetser that he got jumped by 3 guys. It was crazy because I was walking my dog and we were walking towards him and this car did a U-turn. It was middle of the day during lunchtime. There's people out everywhere. And I saw the car just creep up onto the sidewalk and didn't pay any attention because there's businesses all around, Kept walking, and it's crazy. In the video, you see them jump out of the car and run kind of past me diagonally and start beating up the owner for his watch. He was wearing a Rolex, a Cartier bracelet, a few chains, and that was the whole thing that one of the security gates parking attendants was saying that oh, well, he's flashing all this jewelry around, and I get that, but it still doesn't mean he deserved to get robbed or to feel bad, not or any less bad for him.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, you can be tacky and flash all your jewelry around. That just shows you have poor taste, but it doesn't mean that you deserve to be robbed.
Yeah, that was wild.
Yeah, that's just unbelievable. And you had to be a witness for this.
Oh yeah, it was.
And you know what? That may happen. Did the police get your name?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, they got all my information because they literally ran past me, and I tried to go back to help the guy because I thought they were stealing his dog because his dog was with him too, and I was walking.
Which happens here in LA.
Which happens.
It's happened to Lady Gaga, and it's happened to other people that their dogs are stolen because they have expensive dogs.
Which is crazy. We can't walk our dogs now.
We're still a very low crime place compared to most of the nation, certainly most metros. It's really funny, but yeah, we get a lot of good marquee crimes, especially because Lady Gaga's dogs. I mean, where else is that going to happen?
Sure.
So, I only asked if the police got your name because I had to participate. I had my house robbed and I walked in on the people robbing my house. And this was years ago. And I couldn't have identified the person. They did it through the merchandise they stole. They identified the merchandise. Anyway, and so I go in to testify because they ask you to testify, and you go and you sit in there, and it's a surreal experience. And you sit there and say hello to the jury. They said, "Do you know Mr. So and So?" I said, "No. How do you do?" And he goes, "Good, thank you, nice meeting you." And it was the guy who robbed. But I mean, no, but it was like he was just a young guy. I mean, he was 22 or something. And, I felt so bad. He'd robbed mine, but I was part of a whole string of robberies in the town. And he actually stole people's life savings and
Wait,
tons
you
of
felt
jewelry.
bad for him?
I did feel bad.
Explain, please, because I'm not getting it.
Because I thought, here's this young guy whose life is about to get turned completely upside down because they had him. They had him on video. They had him in all these places. I walked in and I could testify that they kind of tore apart my house. Luckily, I have nothing. I mean, sadly, I don't have any jewelry. I don't have anything worth a lot. For no particular reason. It's just it's not my thing.
Art pieces.
Well, those art pieces are done by people within the family, so yes. But yeah, so the anyway, it was kind of a surreal thing, the whole thing, and then you perhaps will be invited to do that exact thing.
It's just crazy that you feel bad. I mean, I'm trying to unravel, I mean, I get it because his life is gonna be messed up for a while, but it's I feel like it already was.
Yeah,
And is
no.
that my bias? I don't know.
No,
you
no.
know?
I think anyone listening is going to think I'm the crazy one.
Okay, I thought I was crazy.
No.
Sorry.
But I'm just being honest about what I felt in that moment. It was just my moment, that I thought about, oh God, this kid's life is about to get turned upside down. I was just one witness in a string, and they had him on video. They had him carrying safes. They had him doing like all kinds of things. Everyone has like all these security systems. Now everyone in my neighborhood has tons of security. So it is just hardcore. And of course, when your crime, they were all wearing masks, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what they're doing now. But they weren't for mine.
I'm just still kind of like trying to like, gather around like how you felt bad instead of feeling like more upset. Like, because I feel like to break into somebody's house, it's like a really like,
Oh, you feel completely violated. No, I'm not going to underplay how devastating it was, how hard it was, how much of a mess it was because they tear apart the house. Crooks are not nice. It's not like they open up the drawer and go through it. They just dump things out, and they put out a sheet, and they had all kinds of. They had like TVs and computers, all like I did interrupt them right in the middle of something they were doing. So they didn't get all the stuff out. They got some of the stuff out. But yeah, that's what they do. They do not take good care of the place, let me tell you. So they liken this to a kitchen fire example. If you tell about a person who is burned in a kitchen fire, you'll be sympathetic at first, but then you or someone else at some point will suggest that the victim must have been doing something wrong. So mine was a middle of the day thing. They could say, oh, well, there was indication that you were gone, or
you left the doors
left the door open, or the window was unlatched, whatever they want. I mean, they could say a million things. So my own theory about this is so they prove that, in fact, people do blame the victim, and they blame the victim by doing this kind of slow roll toward picking apart the victim. They never quite say why, so I'll put my own theory, which is it's all about safety and control. That if victim did X, so if somebody did something like they left the window unlatched and they were robbed, we think if I latch every window, it won't happen to me.
Wow.
And so basically they're trying to think of ways, they're trying to identify the flaws in the victim so that they can go to themselves and say, it won't happen to me. Where I'm telling you, it will happen.
So
to everybody.
You think it's out of fear?
Yes, it's absolutely out of fear. We do so much out of fear, and then we do this compensatory strategy, which is like blaming the victim. So blaming the victim allows us to think we're not going to suffer the same fate, whereas empathy and compassion are needed to make society thrive, but that requires us to operate on a very different level.
That's crazy, because even when I got my car broken into, I remember blaming myself, saying that I had like a little chain that broke and I threw it in like the cup holder, and told myself that if I hadn't done that, like if it didn't have that little shiny thing just got somebody's attention, that it wouldn't have happened, So it's kind of crazy that I'm still
you blamed yourself.
Yeah.
So the next one, we don't have much time, but it's probably the most interesting one. A man was vaccinated 217 times, and the question is why. So I first saw it on CNN, but it was a paper appearing in the national news and from the Lancet Infectious Diseases. If you don't know, the Lancet is one of the premier medical journals in the entire world. It is out of London. There was a 62-year-old German man who deliberately got vaccinated for COVID-19 217 times. He is reported to be the most vaccinated person in history. And why it was interesting is because we have all these people like on Facebook saying you get the COVID vaccine, all your limbs will fall off, you'll die of strange diseases, etc. So this was a particularly interesting person. He first came to the attention of German-led researchers due to news reports in 2022 when he only had 90 jabs, just 90. And there was a suspicion at the time, the reason he came to everyone's attention is because they thought he was collecting and selling completed vaccination cards. Remember, you couldn't even travel, you couldn't go throughout Europe without proof of vaccination. but there was zero evidence of that. A prosecutor looked into it. They were going to make a case about him. They could not find any evidence that he was selling vaccination cards. So the prosecutor did find evidence when he looked closely of 130 vaccinations over 9 months. That means they were able to track it through these different systems. But the man claims to have received 217 vaccine doses. He got 8 different COVID vaccines. I think we only have 3 or 4 available in this country. And it included all the mRNA versions, and he got it over 29 months. And this is a case of something called hyper-vaccination. It's extremely rare. But the most interesting thing about him medically is he had no major side effects or outcomes. That this didn't seem to affect him in a really negative way, nor did his immune system become overtaxed and thus less effective as suspected for hyper-vaccinated individuals. We think that when someone gets a lot of vaccines, their immune system's going to go, oh my God, I give up. I mean, this is too much. And it's like working out a muscle too much. It'll eventually just kind of peter out. It'll get injured. But instead, his body seemed to have regulated. Now, it's not to say that this is something to do. I don't recommend it by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it is very much not recommended. But it's interesting to look at the considerations of one person. They did find higher concentrations of the immune cells and antibodies for COVID virus as compared to a control group who received 3 vaccinations. So he did seem to have more of an active immune system, but no signs of immune system fatigue, and never tested positive for COVID and never showed a sign of a past infection and otherwise functioned normally. So this is all to set the stage for why. So where the articles don't address is why. So I wanted to go through what could possibly be the considerations. I looked at 3 particular things that we might consider when we see this. One is something called factitious disorder, but you know it more colloquially as Munchausen syndrome. That is something we hear a lot about. That used to be the old name for it. The second is obsessive compulsive disorder, which is a thought because he kept getting this this strategy of getting jabs over and over. And then health anxiety. We looked at something called illness anxiety disorder, which used to be known as hypochondria. So factitious disorder, Munchausen, rule that out. You guys saw The Act, the Patricia Arquette movie? Maybe you didn't. It's really a good one. And this portrays Munchausen by proxy, where the mother's making the daughter sick. Factitious disorder alone is somebody who makes himself sick. And one day, perhaps I can talk about that. I once encountered a patient who had that, and I've encountered a couple of people who've had it, but you don't encounter them in a normal way. They don't tell you they have it. Basically, what happens, because I've worked in hospital systems, is all of a sudden the medical test, the people are coming in, they're saying they have this thing, they're presenting the symptoms, they know exactly what to say and do and how to present, but then you do the requisite testing and they don't test for the illness, and then you can say, look, you don't have this, and then they will fall apart, and you can look into their history and I'll see a lot of other things. People can ask why. It's usually, the theory is it's for attention, but it's something they really don't seek help for. They mimic or produce illness or injury. They exaggerate symptoms. They continue with the deception even without receiving any visible benefit or reward. And even when they're faced with objective evidence that doesn't support their claims. And I had personal experience with this. The best you get is a glazed over look and I gotta go, and then they run out. So I ruled out that. The next is obsessive compulsive, and there was reason, because the guy kept coming back. He said yes. I mean, he didn't he didn't say he had COVID. That wasn't part of his thing. He was trying to prevent it. So he really didn't meet Munchausen at all. The next is obsessive compulsive disorder. This is specifically characterized by obsessions and compulsions. Obsessions are things like intrusive, distressing, or persistent thoughts or images. Compulsions are specific acts you perform repeatedly to stop. And usually this takes at least an hour of your day to go through these obsessions and compulsions, and it significantly inhibits your ability to function. So when you meet someone with OCD, you know it. I mean, they tell you about their suffering, and they are suffering. It is a severe illness. But the next one, I ruled that out too, and I'll talk about why, but mostly because this was not somebody who was distressed about getting these things, where usually someone with OCD is distressed about the actions that they are taking, even though they're trying to relieve the obsessions. Also, this was not something he did repeatedly for more than an hour. He went and got a vaccination and then waited a few days and then got another one, etc. Really, this seems to fit more with illness anxiety disorder. This is where you bring preoccupied, you're preoccupied with having or acquiring a serious illness for 6 months or longer, despite no symptoms. He absolutely fits that. He's repeatedly checking one's body for signs of illness, so he's probably doing a lot of COVID tests, repeatedly checking in with physicians or seeking medical care. We certainly know that with the seeking vaccinations. It also could be they go the other direction. They avoid appointments. He's being very anxious about his health, and he's being easily alarmed about personal health issues. And can you put up the graphic for that just really quickly? I just wanted to show for people watching the YouTube, you can go to the YouTube, youtube.com/Dr. Greg, and look at this. You could look at this thing. But bottom line is, OCD and illness anxiety disorder have very similar courses. With OCD, you have an obsessive thought, you have anxiety that results, you do the compulsion, you feel temporary relief, which then leads back to the obsessive thought, and that happens over and over again. With the cycle of illness anxiety, you have the thoughts of being sick, you feel the anxiety, you avoid or seek reassurance, or perhaps get a medical procedure, and then you feel temporary relief. But then the thoughts of being sick come back again. So you can see how incredibly similar they are, but they're not quite the same. So I thought this was illness anxiety disorder. But you might ask quickly, it'd say, how can any doctor let this happen? Well, there was a study in 2017 to say a survey of 2,100 physicians of the American Medical Association found that approximately 20% of medical care is deemed unnecessary, including 20% of tests and 11% of procedures. But before we go into putting nefarious reasons, the most common reasons actually are fear of malpractice, 85%, patient pressure and request, 59%, well, that's a big one, and difficulty accessing medical records, 38%. So the doctors are usually put over a barrel and pushed into it, and they do it to kind of avoid a problem, because they're not there as gatekeepers, they're there to give medical care. So if it's not going to hurt the person, they'll often do it. But I thought that was pretty fascinating and we'll know more about him in the future. Maybe we'll talk about him some more.
Yeah, I'm curious how his health was before. Was he really active and worked out, and his eating, or why his body, his immune system is just perfectly fine,
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question to ask, and certainly one person's experience does not mean that will be every person's experience. A friend of mine who's an immunologist, I was talking about this study to her, and she says, well, there's immune system fatigue and blah, 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 the T cells. And I said, they did not find evidence of that with him. And she's like, I can't believe that. And I'm like, yeah, I know. It's pretty wild. So who knows? I mean,
it could just be his genetic makeup too.
It could be. We're not going to give a bunch of people 217 COVID shots just to see what gives. That's the only way you could really find out. But, there might be other ways. But it's interesting to note it wasn't the fear fest that a lot of people were projecting. But, if you get more than what's a medical procedure, more than what's prescribed or required, that starts to raise some questions. So, and maybe you might have hypochondria, which is illness anxiety disorder. Yeah. Well, that wraps up the show for today. I had to rush through that because we're running out of time. So sorry, folks. This is Dr. Greg Cason and Brian and Gus. Hey, guys. Thank you for being here. Until next time, be present, be flexible, and be kind.